Greetings, fellow Who-gazers, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you through the world of the target novelizations in publication order. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. We have a packed program for you today. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by my longtime friend, Jan Fennick. She is a New York-based Doctor Who writer. She is, in fact, the third consecutive Doctor Who guest that I've had in the New York area, and the first of those three who is a native New Yorker. So very excited to be talking to her about her fandom journey, her writing, and of course this week's episode, Doctor Who and the Claws of Axos. Some interesting news from the world of Doctor Who. The covers for at least 4 of the new Target novelizations due in the summer of 2022 have been released and previewed on the Twitter feed. So we have seen covers for the David Fisher adaptations of The Stones of Blood and The Androids of Tara. And we've also seen covers for the thematically similar titles, The Eaters of Light and The Fires of Pompeii, Light and Fire. I will probably not be covering those books on this podcast until we reach them in publication order. We are still in 1977 here, so 2022 is quite a long way out. But I will be covering 2 out of the 5 books on Trap 1 this summer, and on Trap 1 we do plan on discussing all 5, so that's very exciting news. We also this week had the casting reveal that Neil Patrick Harris is going to play one of the Doctor's greatest enemies in the new Doctor Who episodes currently being filmed by Russell T. Davies. And there's a lot of online speculation as to exactly which character he's going to be. They're not exactly keeping it a secret, with lots of clues being shown in the available set dressings, but of course this is RTD, so there might well be some unexpected twist, and there's almost certainly a lot that we don't know. I'll just say that growing up as a teen in the late 80s, Neil Patrick Harris was a very big deal for me because I found Doogie Howser, MD, to be a very influential and important sitcom personally. Now, granted, that was almost 35 years ago, and he has done many, many things in his career ever since, but that is the role that has stuck with me the longest, and there's rarely a day that goes by when the distinctive Doogie Howser theme melody is not playing in my head on almost infinite loop. But we have, like I said, a lot to discuss. We're going to have my friend Jan on after the break for the weekly conversation, and then after that I'll be breaking down the text of the novelization of the Claws of Axos. Let's get to it. So my next guest is a friend that I made the very first night of the very first Long Island Doctor Who convention way back in 2013, even before the 50th anniversary special or Night of the Doctor had aired. And we were placed on the same panel celebrating the Peter Davison years, and we've pretty much been friends ever since. Jan, welcome to Doctor Who Literature.
Hi, Jason. How you doing?
So, you and I both grew up on Long Island, both probably were watching Doctor Who at the same stations at around the same time. But of course, we didn't meet until the 50th anniversary.
Right. I was going to say, I don't know if you went to Icon at any point in time, so we may have passed one another or not. Because that was my only Doctor Who fandom really in the New York metro area. So
I was at the one convention in Manhattan in 1985, but I was 11 going on 12 and didn't know anybody. The Icons I never went to, so my very first con on Long Island was the one in 2013.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. So, yeah, I don't think I ever went to any in Manhattan. I used to go to the ones in Chicago, and we'll talk about that more later. But, yeah, the only local area stuff I really did was Icon. So I guess that probably was the first time we ever met, unless we crossed paths somewhere, between Comac and Syosset without knowing it.
It's possible. You never know. But I never made any high school field trips to the Comac Motor Inn, so I was never really out in your neck of the woods.
True fact, I've never been in there. I've only driven by it for the last 50 odd years. But when I was our high school graduation, I actually did have friends who thought about renting a room there just so we could throw like a graduation party. And then they kind of chickened out at the last minute. So I've never stepped foot anywhere near there. But it's right around the corner from my house. So I pass it all the time.
My level of popularity in high school in the late 80s was such that I was never invited to the Comac Motor Inn, and I was also a Doctor Who fan. I'm sure those two facts are totally unrelated.
Well, I was too, and like I said, it was just a group of my nerdy friends who thought about doing this for graduation. And then, if they did it, they didn't invite me in the end because they stopped talking to me a week before graduation. So, who knows?
You and I, however, have both been pretty prolific getting published in the Outside In books, but you have gone one better, and you have actually co-authored a book. So let's talk about that first.
Okay, well, I am one of 6 people who co-authored the Red, White, and Who, the story of Doctor Who in America, and I was probably the lowest person on the totem pole there. It was a project that Jennifer Adams Kelly and Stephen Hill and Rob Warnock were working on for like 8 years before they brought me on to do work on that. But it was one of those things where my friends in Chicago, who I've known forever, the late Jennifer Adams Kelly and I were best friends from the age of 13 onward. And I'm the person who got her into Doctor Who. The Chicago was like the hub of Doctor Who fandom, especially in like the 80s going into the 90s. And they were probably part of the premier club at the time, which was called the Federation. They did video zine, they did a print zine, they went to all sorts of Midwest cons doing costume contests and panels and this and that and the other thing. So they really were in fandom from the early 80s onward. And at some point they suddenly realized nobody had written a book about American fandom. And so they started doing the research and doing lots and lots of stuff. And then it sort of became a hub where other people they knew, including myself, got asked to do work on it. And my main thing in there was that there was surveys that were sent out. There was an internet survey asking people all sorts of stuff, favorite doctors, favorite episodes, favorite companions, how they got into it. The things that, what else do you do in fandom? Was it, do you costume? Do you write filks? Do you do fan art? Do you just, do you do videos, whatever? So it was a very in-depth trying to find out like what the average American Doctor Who fan does. And the book actually came out. But it took forever because it just kept kind of going on and on. And I think they did surveys initially and then it kind of got stalled. So then I did them the last year or two of before publication. And to my knowledge, it's still the only book on American Doctor Who fandom that's still out there because nobody else has really known what's going on with it. And because there's been a lot of books about fandom in general, UK fandom, etc., but not the whole American side. It was 2017 that the book came out. So, and the other thing that Jennifer, Steve, Rob, etc., they all were involved with Chicago Visions and now currently Chicago TARDIS, which is the second longest running Doctor Who convention in the United States. Galley's the longest running, Gallifrey one in Los Angeles, and then Visions, which then kind of morphed into Chicago TARDIS. And I know Chicago TARDIS has been running for quite some time also. So
I was at 2 of the last 3 Visions because I was living in the Midwest for law school. So I was at Visions 1996 and 97. I could probably still draw a floor plan of the Hyatt O'Hare just based on my memories of those 2 long weekends. Due to having just graduated law school and working at starvation wages, if that, I had to miss Visions 98, and I believe that was the last one, and then I was back in New York before I even found out if there was going to be a Visions 99. Were you at either one of those?
no, I was actually at the first 3. So that was 1990, 1991, and 1992. I can't remember if I was at 93 or not. But what happened was that the other thing that I do, or was doing at the time, was I deal in dolls, and I have a couple books out on doll collecting. And so friends of ours were had a show on the Sunday of Thanksgiving at Stony Brook University. In fact, the same area in the sports complex, which is also where Icon used to be held. And I kind of couldn't get out of doing that. So it was very hard because unfortunately Visions and Chicago TARDIS as well were always on Thanksgiving weekend. And so I couldn't get away. So I wound up having to stay in New York after the first couple of years. And I did get to Chicago TARDIS later on because in terms of dolls, I mean, eBay took over everything. So I stopped doing doll shows. But there was a time where between March and November of every year, I was somewhere on the East Coast doing a doll toy and teddy bear show between Maine and like Virginia. So
Wow.
yeah, I used to be very, very like tied up with that, but just internet sales and everything, the show's kind of dwindled. But I was at the first, like I said, at least 3, maybe 4 visions, and I helped Jennifer because I was sort of her assistant. She was like involved with programming. We helped run the costume contest. We helped out backstage in the cabaret, which was sort of a talent contest with the guests that used to be a staple of cons, and I think the guests all just decided that they didn't want to spend their time doing that. So unless there's something special, I don't know of any cons that do that anymore. But we used to do that, and we did some programming. We'd help out in the photo studio. We were sort of like Jacks of all trade. But Jen was like very involved. If you went in '96, I'm sure she was there, but she had just had her kid, she just had the kid because she was born in October, so she probably wasn't around a lot. She was probably backstage and also, dealing with a newborn. And '97 was probably first 1-year-old. So that's why you didn't see her. But yeah, Steve is still around. Steve is still working with Chicago TARDIS. So, but they were all the people that did this book, and they like know everybody. So, because they were sort of the forerunners of hardcore American fandom, I think. Other than, I guess there were some people in Los Angeles, aside from Sean Lyons, who runs Gallifrey One. So.
And what was your entree into Doctor Who fandom in the first place? When did you discover the show? What was your first episode, if you can recall?
Oh, I can recall it very, very strongly. I actually first discovered Doctor Who in a hotel room in Stratford-upon-Avon in the UK. It was August of 1978. I want to say August 10th. At one point, I actually did look it up. And I was just sitting in a hotel room. I was 15 years old. We were on this family trip to the UK. We had, done the touristy bit, and we were in our room, and I think we just had dinner, and there was not much. And I was the equivalent of channel surfing in those days, which I believe there were only 3 channels. There might have been 4. I can't remember if Channel 4 existed yet, but I happened to tune in BBC One, and I was a big science fiction fan. My fandom really started with Star Trek back in the early 70s. And my parents actually, when I was a kid, toddler, I used to watch Star Trek in prime time with my mom and dad, and also Twilight Zone and reruns, etc. And I became like a hardcore Trekkie around 72, 73, just sort of found it on my own. So I read a lot of books. I love science fiction. And I just happened to be changing the channel. I guess it was like 7 o'clock at night. Suddenly I see this weird thing with this telephone box landing, and this odd guy with curly hair and a floppy hat and a long scarf, and a woman who's barely dressed in basically a leather bikini, and a robot dog. And I was like, what is this? And they started talking about the planets, and they were on the moon. So the first episode that I saw was episode 1 of the Sunmakers, and it just grabbed me immediately. I got the whole political satire, tax satire, fell madly in love, and didn't know if I was ever going to see it again. And it's weird because I've been an Anglophile since I was very small, huge Beatles fan, huge British music fan. Also, I grew up kind of on a lot of Masterpiece Theatre and a lot of other oddball like BBC shows, Britcoms, and somehow I'd never heard of Doctor Who before. So I had no idea what this was that I was watching, but I knew I needed to see more. And as luck would have it, and actually they talk about it in Red, White, and Who, that there was a whole package deal that went on with Time Life that sold it to syndicated stations as well as some public broadcasting stations. So in October, I think of that year, Doctor Who and a bunch of other packaged shows showed up on WOR, which used to be syndicated independent station from New Jersey. Now I think they're sub channel or something else, but in those days they're independent, and they bought this package, and Doctor Who was on with commercials, and was started with Robot. We went from Robot through Invasion of Time for like the next 3 years. And if I remember correctly, originally it was on in the evenings, and then they switched it to Saturday mornings. And I remember because my senior year of high school, I would get up and I would be watching Doctor Who before I had to go for my driving lessons, so I could work on getting my driver's license. So my student driver stuff. So, and then I moved to Chicago. I went to Northwestern for college. So I went there in October of 1980, and they were showing Doctor Who on Sunday nights after Masterpiece Theater, and they showed it in the movie format. So all of a sudden we weren't getting the cliffhangers. I was shocked because I'd never seen it without commercials before. And I think by 1981, it was fall of 1981. I came back to school. I'd been home for the summer, and they were actually showing the Key to Time because Chicago got new episodes before New York did. And that stood out to me because the first new episode I saw out of the first 3 years of Baker happened to be with the power of Kroll. And so that's it's a terrible episode, but it's something that means a lot to me because I suddenly was like hanging out at my friend's apartment, having come back, and just the whole, like, our little science fiction group was all sitting around trying to figure out what in God's name was going on and making fun of the Swampies and Kroll, etc. So that was my second intro to that. And I've been a fan ever since.
Kroll rose from the deep to protect us, his people. Let us give thanks to Kroll.
Can you still do the Kroll dance, which goes something like dum 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 dum? Kroll.
Oh yeah. In fact, we sort of rewrote it. A friend of mine actually did, where they, the standing with the spears and Great Kroll, Mighty Kroll. So it became Great Kroll, Mighty Kroll, Badass Mofo Kroll, and so on. We used to do this at cons in unison, just out of nowhere, because we were a bunch of like obnoxious college students who did these things. So yeah, I can still do it, I think. And it's, to this day, it's still, the fact that the Swampies were like painted green Rastafarians was just like kind of very weird to me. And the lead Swampy was John Abineri, who was on Robin of Sherwood, which is one of my other like big fandoms in the 90s. So
I'm a big fan of John Abineri because he is the only Doctor Who actor to cross over into the Godfather universe.
That I did not know.
That is a little unfair. Although when Francis Ford Coppola, I was going to say Mario Puzo, when Francis Ford Coppola recut the movie, episode 3 during the pandemic into the Godfather coda, he removed John Abineri's one scene and one line of dialogue. So that Doctor Who connection no longer exists.
Oh no. That's terrible.
I once, in the early 90s, wrote a bit of fanfic, which thankfully has been lost to the ages, where I decided to imply that Don Corleone was a past incarnation of the Doctor, which is a terrible idea for many reasons, but when you're writing fanfic and you're in the zone, you can do that kind of thing. Fortunately, Stephen Moffat did not pick up on it.
Thank goodness. There's a lot of crackfic out there, so I'm sure that's not the worst idea anybody ever had.
You are correct. It was August the 10th. It was the rerun, because Sunmakers originally aired November-December 1977, which is ahead of us. We are only up to April 1977, I should say, in the world of the novelizations. But Sunmakers airs a few months after today's book comes out, and then the rerun was August. Episode 1 in the reruns achieved ratings of 3.2 million viewers. So you were one of the 3.2 million.
Wow. I mean, that's an odd trip for me because for some reason it was like a nexus of like so many things that became important to me. I've kind of joked about it, but it's like I discovered Doctor Who. I discovered the band The Who because Who Are You came out that week. I discovered Kate Bush and the Boomtown Rats because they both had like hits on the record charts, and I listened to the radio a lot. And it was just like this weird amalgam of like all these things that would go on to make my life worthwhile. But probably Doctor Who's the biggest, since now I write stuff about it occasionally.
Kate Bush has been very big this week because one of her songs was reused on Stranger Things on Netflix. So
oh yeah, and Kate Bush fandom is kind of going crazy because I think the album went back into the charts and it's now like the highest it's ever charted anywhere in the world, even though it was a huge deal in 1985. And I think the song is like still number 1 on Spotify, or it may have dropped to number 2 now. because of BTS or some like K-pop band, but it's been amazing. And I kind of laugh because it's one of those things where it's not my least favorite song, but it's not in my like top 10. And it's kind of like, people like, oh my God, I love Kate Bush. I love this song. It's like the only song that they know, except maybe Wuthering Heights. And it'd be like saying, oh, well, I love the Beatles, and only knowing I Want to Hold Your Hand and like, Hey Jude. So there's a lot more Kate Bush that people should be into. So
There was a fan theory in the early '90s, which was always put forward in jest. There was a fan theory that Kate Bush wrote Kinda, but that, of course, is not remotely true, unfortunately.
I never heard that, but that's actually kind of a cool one.
It was a jokey fan theory. It was meant to not be true, but it does fit in a certain point of view.
Yeah, it does.
So speaking of things that are new in the world of Doctor Who this week, as opposed to Kate Bush and Stranger Things, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, there has been a major casting revelation for the special that Russell T Davies is filming right now in Wales, and that would be the introduction of well-known, longtime American actor Neil Patrick Harris into the Doctor Who universe. And what is your take on this bit of America-friendly casting news?
I'm not shocked by it because I don't know if you've seen It's a Sin, which was Russell's incredibly moving drama about the AIDS crisis in the UK in the 80s. If you have HBO Max, it's on HBO Max. I highly recommend it. Have several boxes of tissues, but it's beautiful. And actually, Neil Patrick Harris is in that, and he's playing a British character in there where he's from what I remember, he's like the older gentleman friend of one of the kids in the story. Russell tends to like to recast people that he's worked with already. He likes to bring them into other things. And considering like Neil's married, he's got like 2 young kids, I think they're probably Doctor Who fans. He may be a Doctor Who fan on his own because he's maybe a little bit younger than I am. I think he's in your age range, Jason, but I'm not sure. So he's the right age to have been into it. And from what little I've seen, and actually they're filming in Bristol right now, not in Wales. They're on the streets of Bristol, and a friend of mine actually was complaining because she's doing a research project up in Edinburgh. She's from Alabama, but she was in Bristol going and got her master's at the University of Bristol, and I guess they're filming right down the street from her old flat. So she's just heartbroken that she can't get down there. But it looks like they're utilizing, Neil's strengths because he's a Broadway actor. He's a song and dance guy. He was in Hedwig and the Angry Inch on Broadway and a lot of other stuff. So it looks like there may be some, I don't think they're doing a musical episode, but I think there's going to be some song and dance stuff going on, because it just from the little videos that I've seen, just like the movements, etc., he seems to be kind of spry and not just sort of playing a serious, like, dramatic part. He's not like playing, a serious, like I don't know if he's playing the Master. I don't think he's playing the Master, but if it is the Master has suddenly, been channeling Fred Astaire and or the MC from Cabaret. So
there's a Doctor Who crossover for you. I try to avoid spoilers. I don't mind learning things that the BBC themselves or the showrunner himself is publicizing. So I don't mind knowing that there's going to be a Jadoon in Fugitive of the Jadoon, or I don't mind learning that there's going to be Cybermen in Dark Water. I just don't want to know any non-public spoilers. So it is kind of obvious who Neil Patrick Harris is meant to be playing based on some of the set photos that have been released. So I don't mind knowing that much, but I also don't want to get too deep into it because I would like to be as surprised as possible when the episode itself airs.
Yeah, I tend to live for spoilers. I'm actually an administrator on Gallifrey Base, and one of my areas of expertise is the spoiler area. But honestly, Russell is doing a really good job of messing with everybody, confusing everybody, and yet not letting anything major out. I mean, other than some minor things, and honestly, it's just everything that we've seen from that I've seen from set photos and set videos and people reporting on stuff that they've seen in public. None of it makes sense. I mean, in a good way. It's absolutely bonkers. And I think Russell must be sitting at home, like, reading Gallifrey Base and reading, the internet and giggling because nobody really knows what he's doing, at least fans wise. Nobody really knows what's going on here, which is really cool. And I've been kind of joking that, obviously they're just doing a recast of Cabaret, because there are official photos, including on Russell's own Instagram, of Neil Patrick Harris he's in wearing a tux and tails and top hat, and he's wearing very MC-ish kind of, very like Berlin-ish from the 1920s makeup. Not just like set makeup, but obviously very kind of Joel Grey from Cabaret look. So it'll be interesting to see what he's actually doing, because I have no idea, but he looks great. So we'll find out. Because like I said, Russell probably is sitting at home, like just cackling like a madman, trying to, seeing people trying to suss out what he's doing. And I'm sure they're way off the mark. So it's funny because I wasn't excited about these upcoming special, whatever it is. Because, I'm not longing for the halcyon days of 2008, particularly, but between the director being Richard Talale, Neil Patrick Harris being involved, and some of the other bonkers stuff that I'm seeing going on, I'm suddenly like more intrigued, especially since I'm getting the vibe based on like clothing and props and stuff, that this is not our regular 10, and this is not a regular Donna, and so we'll see where this goes. But as long as it's not like specifically, oh, this is a lost episode, lost story that we didn't do before, I'm good with it, because I think there's a lot more that's going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. So, damn you, Russell, you've got me interested when I swore I didn't care.
Yeah, that special breed of fan, and I use that term advisedly, that was demanding the show be given a quote-unquote rest, i.e. canceled because they didn't like the Timeless Children, that breed of fan has mysteriously gone silent ever since the new casting news and the Neil Patrick Harris announcement broke.
Yeah, well, the new argument is that, 2008 was the most popular Doctor Who was ever been, which is not quite true. And everybody loves David Tennant, and everybody loves 10, and everybody loves, Donna, and they're the greatest pairing ever, except maybe, 10 and Rose. And therefore, everybody has to be happy about this and be thrilled that we're reliving 2008. And if you cared about anybody else, it doesn't matter, because none of them really count. It only counts up to, the season 2, 3, and 4, and maybe the specials. And considering my favorite era of New Who is really the Stephen Moffat years, and there are a lot of us out there, it's kind of like dismissive. And, I'm fine with it, but if this is for the 60th anniversary, I'm really hoping there's more up Russell's sleeve than just, like I said, a lost episode from 208. And now that he's some of the other elements that seem to be coming in, including the character that Neil Patrick Harris may be playing, that intrigues me more, because now we're tying in other stuff from the past and or things that have never been touched on before, at least on the television medium, but perhaps in other mediums. So I'm more interested now. Like I said, we'll see what happens, but I'm still holding out. Maybe we might get a Matt Smith or a Peter Capaldi, even if it's like a 2-minute cameo. I just want to make sure the rest of, New Who is represented. And I really would like to see some of the older Doctors as well, but we'll see what happens.
The character that Neil Patrick Harris is thought to be playing was referenced in a season 12, or a series 12, I should say, Jodie Whittaker episode. So that would not be totally out of the blue. But again, we will see. As somebody once said, time will tell. It always does.
Yeah.
Now, of course, for me, the golden age of Doctor Who is watching the show weeknights at 7 p.m. on Channel 21 back in 1985, and nothing is going to recapture that vibe unless Ken Rosenblum comes out of retirement to go do pledge drives for Doctor Who again. But that seems unlikely. He's pretty busy now at Toro Law School, so I don't think he's going to be doing Doctor Who bumpers anytime soon.
Yeah, I actually didn't watch it on Channel 21 until probably like 1987-ish, because I was actually in grad school from in Syracuse, New York, 1985 through 1980, late 87. I officially graduated in like January of 1988. So I was mostly up there, and I did not get very good television reception, so I didn't watch a lot of it up there until like my last year, when I was actually in a university apartment, and we finally were able to get cable TV. So I missed a lot of like the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy years because of that. And it seemed like no matter where I went in the country, it was always either we were starting with Robot again, or we were starting with a Pertwee episode, usually spearheaded from space. Or the other thing that when I moved around the country a lot, doing doll shows and or just visiting people, 9 times out of 10, the episode that was showing, if it was on, was Talons of Weng-Chiang. So my last two Doctors, I've actually only seen those episodes probably like once or twice, and I do, except for Vengeance on Varos and Remembrance of the Daleks and maybe one or two others, because I just kept moving around and I could never find it on. And when I was home in New York, I was then working full time in the city, so I was commuting, and that included sometimes working on Saturdays. So because I remember it moving to Saturdays, because I remember watching Degrassi and then Doctor Who, and then I think Blake Seven may have been on around then too. So I just sort of saw it in bits and pieces. So that's why my later classic series is all kind of fuzzy. It kind of drops off after like the first year of Peter.
I actually discovered Degrassi because it was on right before Doctor Who on Saturdays on Channel 21.
Yep, that's when I started watching it too. And actually, I got really into The Next Generation later on, when it was on cable, because I just kind of thought it was funny that these kids were like the kids of the kids that I remembered back in the day. So even though it was way out of the demographic, but it was like late night, it would be on Nick for Kids or whatever, Teen Nick, and I would just like watch it because it was like good mindless soap operas. So.
No, Caitlin from the original Degrassi is about right up there with Sarah Jane Smith for me in terms of female characters that I worshipped in the 1980s.
That makes sense.
Speaking of teens, Neil Patrick Harris is less than 6 months older than me, so I always say, if I become famous in less than 6 months, I will have caught up to him.
Excellent. Well, I said I thought he was about in your age range, because I know I'm about 10 years older than you. And I remember him like when Doogie Howser first started, and he seemed so like tiny and fun. He's not that much younger than I.
He is much better preserved than me. We'll just say that. So, when did you first discover during your various fandom journeys the Target novelizations?
Probably when I was it was either, well, I was still in high school and watching it on WR, or maybe early on, and when I was at Northwestern, and this is actually before I turned Jennifer Adams Kelly onto the show, because I remember picking them up, probably the American versions of the novels, and just seeing the forward by Harlan Ellison kind of like piqued my interest, because if Harlan thought it was good, then it must be good. And so I have some. It's kind of funny. I have like random books. I don't have the whole series. I've never read them all. I'm a bad fan that way, because again, I was in college, I was moving around a lot, so I had friends who used to go to the local comic book shop and buy the import novels at great cost, and I was into a lot of other stuff. I was still into Star Trek. I was into like general science fiction, into a lot of fantasy, comic books. So I love Doctor Who, but it wasn't just my sole reason for fandom. And being a cool college student, I had it was too cool for me to be like just a single track fan, I guess. So I've read them sort of piecemeal, and I have some somewhere in a box upstairs in my room, but I don't even remember which ones I had. So, but it was usually, I think, things that were missing at the time. I know I have like Enemy of the World and a couple other things that have now finally shown up, and it's like, oh my god, I remember reading this like 30 years ago or more. This is so cool. I can finally see what the character looks like, or the story looks like.
The Target novelization spoiled it for me because I got into Trek a few years after I got into Doctor Who, just through the reruns on Channel 44, the PBS station out of Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, because after they lost the Doctor Who license, they were showing 2 episodes back-to-back of Star Trek the original series in the old Doctor Who time slot late on Saturday night.
I was going to say, we got them on cable here too, because that was Cap's Comic Cavalcade. Used to
That's
be
right.
Used to be their sponsor.
That's right. So I watched the entirety of TOS in high school, probably 10th and 11th grades, courtesy of channel WVIA Channel 44, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, Hazleton. But when I discovered the TOS novelizations by James Blish, I was disappointed that they were only short story adaptations that condensed the tale and did not go the full target, which is to turn the story into a complete 120 what have you page book.
Right.
So because of the Target novelizations, I never got as into James Blish as everybody else.
Yeah, see, with me, like I said, I started, I was watching Star Trek in prime time, even though I was, like 3 to 6, and then got bitten by the bug probably when I was 9 or 10. So I was buying the Blish novels when I was in, sixth, seventh grade. So I have the entire run of the Blish novels and didn't. So Doctor Who came after for me. So it was like cooler that the Target novels were actually, full novels of one single episode as compared to the Blish stuff, but it didn't ruin it for me because I kind of like, I guess I moved up in class when it came to, adaptations. And then, there were also a lot of like movie novels of the Star Wars stuff and Star Trek movies and this and that. So it all kind of tied together.
Had you ever read the Claws of Axos novelization before I asked you to read it for this show?
I honestly don't think I have. I'm not sure, but like I said, I think the Target novels that I had and I read, a lot of them were Tom Baker things that I already liked, and then I sort of was gravitating towards the second Doctor. I think, I said things that were sort of missing. So if I'd seen the story on TV, then I kind of left it alone and went to, earlier stuff or things that were really difficult to find, and also just this is going to be blasphemous, but the third Doctor is not my favorite Doctor. So I probably didn't just on that point alone. I don't hate him. There's no Doctor that I dislike, but I have my favorites, and Pertwee is kind of like on the bottom of the totem pole there.
So before I ask whether or not you liked the book, having read it for the first time, what was your impression of Claws of Axos, the story, going into this reading?
I didn't dislike it. Like I said, there's certain. It's funny. Like I said, I'm not crazy about Third Doctor, but I think he's got like three of the best companions that ever were. I mean, Sarah Jane is like up there in my pantheon, because she was the second companion I ever had encountered, and really she was the main one because I only saw the one episode with Leela until we went over after 2 seasons of it. But I love Joe Grant too, and I love Unit. So I liked the story. I thought it was kind of fun. Again, blasphemy, but I got really tired of like the Doctor versus the Master, and the same thing in the Fifth Doctor's tenure. I just like he seemed to pop up. He was to me he's annoying and overused. So yeah, it's yet another Master story. That's nice, you know but I thought the concept was interesting, and I kind of like more the Unit and the Joe stuff in there. So, like I said, I know I'm, you'll probably get hate letters, because I'm not in the status quo here.
This is an episode from the season where Roger Delgado was a series regular and was in 5 straight stories in a row. And I know that a lot of fans have it. Well, I say a lot. I know there are some vocal fans who have a problem with that. Now, in retrospect, I think it works very well when you're watching the show in sequence because Roger Delgado is so good. You want to have as much of him as possible. But of course, that had an effect on his career, and they've never tried that again, where the Master does every single episode in a season. I think it's a good experiment, and I think
Yeah.
because of Roger Delgado, it works. I don't think Claws of Axos is the best of that particular season, but I think Delgado is very good in it.
Yeah, at least he's got something more interesting to do. I mean, I just wrote a piece, and I'm going to plug another book that I'm in that's actually coming out in November, which is The World of Demons, The Villains of Doctor Who, which is Fayetteville Mafia Press, and it's actually it'll be available at conventions. We're hoping to get it out by Li Who and probably Chicago TARDIS. And it's also, I'm looking right now on the Barnes and Noble page, and it's there too. And I just wrote an entire piece on it's the Zygons and Sea Devils and Silurians and Sontarans. So I had to watch the Sea Devils, and I had to watch the Silurians, and basically anything and everything that had one of those 4 races in it. And the Master feels more organic. It feels like he fits into more of this than, let's say, the Sea Devils, which was just like a rehash of the Silurians, only with extra special guest villain, the Master, and just like he felt really kind of shoehorned in there. Either he was shoehorned in there, or the Sea Devils were shoehorned in there, and we didn't need both at the same time. Whereas this, him working, with and against the Axos actually worked for me because I thought it was kind of cool that he was like playing both sides and etc. So yeah, he worked much better here.
So, what was your impression of the novelization, having read it now for the first time, as compared to the TV episode?
I really liked it. I enjoyed it, and I do like the way Terrance Dicks writes overall. I mean, I remember when I was reading the novels, he tended to be my favorite novelist. It was interesting because I'm also a writer, and I mostly not. I'm published nonfiction. I have a couple of fiction things that were published, and a couple of years ago there was a big thing, on the internet in terms of rules of the things you are never supposed to do that I had always done in my writing slash and my fan fiction, which was actually to use adverbs to switch points of view within a scene because you're an omniscient author, and if you and use other words besides just asked and said, and Dix does all of that. And I was kind of vindicated because I was thinking of a lot of people, especially fan fiction writers, who had these rules and things that you did to be a good writer, and their heads would explode because it was all these things you were never ever supposed to do. And here's Terrance Dicks, who wrote a million Doctor Who novels, and was published author and television writer, etc. And he broke every single one of them. I really enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot of good characterization in there. I think we got more characterization than we did in the show, even with Filer. A little bit more of what the Axons were thinking and doing. And if I had only read the novel and not seen the show, I would have been terribly, terribly disappointed in what the Axons actually looked like, because the way they're described in the book makes, they sound gorgeous, these golden, godlike creatures. And then we get to the TV show and there are people, in unitards with zippers up the back and these weird, funky gold clay masks. So the book reads really well. I think I like the story better in the book than I did on television. And I did actually rewatch the episode this week, the story this week too, just to sort of catch up on it.
He makes very good use of the mind's eye, and of course, I'll go into this a little bit later on this program, but he expands scenes. He is able to incorporate material that they wanted to film but didn't have time for because the scripts were so long and the time slot was so short. He also is able to put the focus on supporting characters who were supposed to be more important than they were, and is able to distract you from some of the less than happily aged special effects work. So Terrance is telling the heart of the story, which kind of gets lost on TV amidst all the spectacle and special effects and the color separation overlay.
Yeah, I think he really got into the heart of the matter, whether it was Chin, who was the bureaucrat, or whether it was Harker, who was the captain, who was Tim Pigott Smith, which I knew he was in Mask of Mandragora. In fact, I just wrote an essay that's coming up in one of the upcoming Outside In books for that. But I didn't know he was in this, so that was kind of a nice surprise. As I said, Filer, and even the Axons themselves, you kind of get a little bit more of what they're doing, and then the Doctor and the Master and how they're sort of kind of playing each other, and Jo's reaction even more so to everything that she's experiencing and everything that's going around. So I liked it from that, because you do get much more into the characters and not just action, action, action. This special effect action on screen.
Terrance also builds a lot more into the emotion of, is the Doctor really going to betray his unit friends? Is he really going to betray Jo Grant? Terrance has the space in the book to lean into that in the way they didn't have the space to lean into it on TV.
Right. I mean, you sort of get a hint of it because Jo on screen seems to think this was happening. But yeah, you get a much more how she's reacting and how, the Brigadier is reacting, and, can we trust the Doctor? Is he just going to ditch us so he can finally get his TARDIS working, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that was really a nice touch.
So, would you recommend this book to others as a very good example of what the Target line can do and how they can improve upon the underlying TV story?
I definitely would. I mean, I think that it was very well done, and it brought me in. I got more out of the book than I did even having watched the episode again in terms of what was going on and again, motivations and thoughts. So I definitely would be one that I would recommend.
And you mentioned Outside In a few minutes ago. You and I, of course, have both been regulars in the first decade's worth of Outside In publications from ATB. I think ATB also put out Red, White, and Who. But what are the most recent Outside Ins that you are in? Because I know a new book is coming out that you are in and I am not.
Yeah, I'm in the next two that are coming out, I'm definitely in. The one that's coming out this August, I believe it's August 28th, is Outside In Fire Walks with Me, which is the shortest book ever. I believe there's 55 authors involved, and it's all Twin Peaks, both the old series, the new series, films, and according to the press release from ATB Publishing, apparently there's some surprises in there too. And so I did a piece on the revival series, episode 7, part 7. There's a Body, All Right, is the title. And my piece is actually a character piece from the point of view of Diane, played brilliantly by Laura Dern, which I don't remember exactly. I believe the title is Anger is an Energy, but I'm not sure about that. I could look it up. I'm lazy. But yeah, I'm in that one. And then there's another one coming out after that, which I believe is... I'm not sure what the actual title is, but it's going to be the first book, the volume 1, which was all classic Doctor Who remixed. So for this one, I did Mask of Mandriga. And that's actually a weird, like, multi-part quiz, sort of like a BuzzFeed type quiz.
Having never seen any Twin Peaks, not when it first came out in the 90s, and having not seen the revival, I opted to sit this one out. So it is the first Outside In volume that I am not in. But I am rejoining the Outside In remix of the classic Doctor Who, so I will be covering a black and white story a little bit earlier than Mask of Mandragora. But I will be back in the Outside In series for that book, so fear not.
At least you'll be back. And then the next two past that are Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, and I will definitely be in both of those also. I already have my episodes staked out. In fact, I have to talk to Stacy Smith, who's our editor. I'm going to be talking to her next week to try to get my DS9 piece in shape, because I can't quite glom what I'm doing on that. I know which episode I'm doing, and I have some ideas, but sometimes she's really good at just like bouncing ideas and finding the right path for it. So
I have picked out my stories for the Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine volumes, but have not written them yet. But I will be speaking to Stacy on this program again very soon, so we'll have a chance to finalize that. So, Jay, what I want to do now is play a game with you, and we are going to play a game of 20 questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
So, I have selected, using the randomizer.net, one and only one Doctor Who story from 1963 up through 2022. I know which story it is. You will have to guess. It is a serial, and you have to use your 20 questions to guess which one story it is. The all-time record is 7. Nobody has failed the game yet. Let's see how you do. Go ahead.
Is it a story from the 60s, 1960s?
It is not a story from the 1960s. Question 2.
Is it a story from the 1970s?
No. Question 3.
Is it a story from the 80s?
No. Question 4.
Okay, so that, I'm just like me thinking out loud here. This actually makes it maybe easier. Is this a story under Russell T. Davis's aegis?
No, it is not. Question 5.
Is this a story under the Moffat aegis?
Yes, it is. So now you've narrowed it down. I've just got to pick which one it is. Question 6.
Is it a 12th Doctor story?
Yes, it is.
Is Clara the companion?
No. Question 8.
Is Bill the companion?
Yes, she is. Question 9.
Is it a 3-part story?
No, it is not. Question 10.
Is it a finale story?
No. Question 11.
Oh, I'm so bad at this. Was it written by Stephen Moffat?
No, it is not a Stephen Moffat story. I think we're up now to question 12, so we're coming into the home stretch.
Is it set on Mars?
It is not set on Mars. Question 13.
Is it set in the past?
It is not. Question 14. I think the good news is now you are guaranteed to solve the puzzle in time, because there are fewer stories remaining in the season than there are questions left out of 20.
Right, but it wasn't... Is David Suchet in the episode?
No, David Suchet is not in the episode. Question 15.
Is it Oxygen?
It is not Oxygen.
I don't think what else it could be. There's nothing left. Um, it's not set in the past. It's not set on Mars. It's not written by Moffat. Is it set in the future?
Yes, it is.
Is it Smile?
Yes, it is.
Oh man, it's like the one that was blanking on. Oh,
I will say that when it came up on the randomizer, I didn't remember it. So
I remember we saw that. Actually, it was at one of the LI whatevers, the ones that aren't the LI Who, because it was on at that point. And I remember I was in a room like watching it with a big group of people, and it's a really good story. But for some reason, I was blanking on it. I was
exactly. Well, you got there. You got it, I think, in 18. So you beat the quiz, and you are a winner. Jan, thank you so much for playing.
oh, you're welcome.
Where can we find you online if we so choose?
Okay, you can find me on Instagram as total_janarchy or on Facebook as under my name, Jan Fennick, Fennick. I really do need to set up a new Twitter so I can maybe talk to people, but that's a little dicey right now. Or email, I am janarchy@gmail.com if anybody needs to drop a line. So.
And you, of course, have several books coming out that you are in. Do you have any other things that you wish to plug?
There is another Long Island LI Who coming up this November, and our guests are going to be Peter Davison, Janet Fielding, Sarah Sutton, and several writers, and probably more good stuff coming up. Trying to think what else I've got going on. Like I said, the other book that I'm in, and let me get you the official title again. Look it up on my phone. It is A World of Demons, the villains of Doctor Who, and the editors are Barnaby Edwards, the non-Dalek Barnaby Edwards, and David Bushman, and that's Fayetteville Mafia Press. And as I said, we'll definitely be at LI Who. I believe they'll be at Chicago TARDIS, and you can also find it. I'm assuming on Amazon. I know it's on Barnes and Noble, etc. And it's a really cool book because it's focusing on all the villains of the series with like each dedicated essay on different aspects and different. I know somebody's doing the Master. A friend of mine did a piece on the invisible monsters of the new series. I did sort of a compare and contrast of 4 different races and how they were in the classic series versus how they are now. And it seems like it's going to be a really good book. So I've got that one coming up. And as I said, Twin Peaks Outside In Fire Walks With Me is coming out in August. And I'm not sure when the next Outside In Doctor Who book is coming out. But I'm assuming that'll be in the next couple of months. And I think that's about it right now that I can talk about.
And of course, I am going to be I'm planning to be on LI Who in November as well. And we're planning on doing a Trap one on Warriors of the Deep, which I have not been able to schedule yet. But you are definitely going to be on that panel with me on Trap one if I am able to put that together.
Excellent. I mean, as I said, I had to watch every single Zygon. Zygon stories weren't so bad, but every single Silurian, Sea Devil, and Sontaran episode there was from the beginning of time to last week. So I definitely have opinions on Warriors of the Deep.
I look forward to hearing them, and that'll be on Trap one, hopefully in the not too distant future. Jan, thanks so much for joining me. Have a great night.
Okay, you too, Jason.
Doctor Who and the Claws of Axos, written by Terrance Dicks, televised as the Claws of Axos, teleplay by Bob Baker and Dave Martin, televised in March and April 1971, published in April 1977. Axos calling Earth, Axos calling Earth. The creatures stood before them, beautiful golden humanoids, offering friendship and their priceless axonite in return for what? Only Doctor Who remains suspicious. What is the real reason for the Axon's sudden arrival on Earth? And why is the evil master a passenger on their spaceship? He very soon finds out. The first sentences of the Claws of Axos novelization are not as spectacular or memorable as the first sentences of the Dalek Invasion of Earth novelization, as we discussed here last week during episode 30. But it is a great picture for the mind's eye, superior to the state of the 1971 special effects art that we saw on television. Quote, it moved, through the silent blackness of deep space like a giant jellyfish through the depths of the sea. Its shape was constantly changing, pulsating with energy and life, and a myriad of colors flickered over its glistening surface. As you can learn from the DVD production notes, or from Shannon Patrick Sullivan's Brief History of Time Travel website, or anywhere else that recounts the history of Doctor Who, Claws of Axos on TV had a troubled genesis. Bob Baker and Dave Martin, the Bristol boys, came to the Doctor Who production offices by accident via a misrouted, non-science fiction script. What about them appealed to Barry Letts and Terrance Dicks? It can be hard to tell watching the original TV serial, but the novelization makes it clear. This is a highly political story with satiric elements, and Terrance Dicks loves his politics. The first two Brigadier POV paragraphs on page 9, just the third page of the book, say it all. This is not a story about alien parasites or goateed time-traveling renegades. It's a story about the perils of homegrown nationalism, the Make Britain Great Again crowd. This is a story about Horatio Chin. Page 9. In the military and scientific complex that formed unit headquarters, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart's day was getting off to a very bad start. The cause of his present troubles was not alien monsters, but earth-bound bureaucrats. Whitehall's latest brainchild was the newly created Ministry of Security, an organization designed to gather all Britain's various intelligence organizations under one central umbrella. The Brigadier had refused to be gathered, taking the position that UNIT was not a national, but an international organization, and as such answerable only to UNIT HQ in Geneva. The war of letters, memos, and reports had continued for some time now, with the Brigadier more than holding his own. But now the Whitehall enemy had wearied of the paper bombardment and sent in their shock troops, in the stocky and unattractive shape of Horatio Chin. Like many small men in high positions, Chin liked to think of himself as Napoleonic. He saw himself as a hard-driving human dynamo, cutting through the restraints of red tape. He was a vain and rather stupid man, but he was also ruthlessly ambitious and tirelessly energetic. Chin eventually overcame most of his opponents by wearing them down. He had even worn down the minister in charge of his own department, who couldn't stand the man, but couldn't think how to get rid of him. Wily old politician that he was, the minister had been struck by a sudden brainwave. He had two main problems at the moment, Chin and the Brigadier. Why not turn them loose on each other? There's more, of course, but there's already a full-length audiobook adaptation of this novelization, narrated by Richard Franklin, whose voice is slightly more pleasant than mine. Though, having heard Mr. Franklin wax rhapsodic about Donald Trump at Li Who in November 2016, a few days after the election, I'm wondering if he was perhaps the best choice to narrate this particular tale. But there are plenty of more acidic asides and jokes about government bureaucrats, like the Brigadier imagining Chin's execution and deciding that a last memo would be more appropriate than a last cigarette. Another element to Claw's troubled genesis is that the script went through many drafts, and Terrance Dicks evidently wrote the final one himself, under his usual axiom that any more than 3 drafts of a script by the original author was only going to make things worse. Claws thus moves along at a breakneck pace on TV for 1971, with lots of short scenes and a choppy feel. This is because lots of material got trimmed. Thanks to the electronic miracle of DVDs and Blu-rays, you can now watch an excerpt of the raw studio footage of Episode 1, under the wonderful title The Vampire from Space on the original DVD, or even the entire studio session for Episode 1 on the Season 8 Blu-ray. My copy of the Blu-ray is autographed by Katie Manning. How about yours? And you can see what material was filmed but didn't make it to air. But this is for Terrance a 135-page book, his second quote-unquote long book in a row, and coming out just a month after the 136-page Dalek Invasion of Earth book. So this tale has room to breathe, and we get a proper introduction for American spy Bill Filer, who on TV played by a decidedly non-American Paul Grist, and who in the book is described as having a, quote, pleasantly ugly face. It's also the second time in the first 5 pages of the book that someone observes that Joe Grant looks too young to be in intelligence work. Now, it's easy to fall into hyperbole, and some would say that I do it every week, but I have to rank the first chapter of the Axos novelization as among Terrance's best work. Now, again, I say this almost every week, but consider this. This is an 11-page chapter. Terrance has to introduce several characters: the Doctor, Joe, the Brigadier, Chin, Bill Filer, Mike Yates, and two British radar technicians, one of whom has a rich internal fantasy life. Ransom's Comet is a memorable part of Chapter 1, but is not mentioned on TV. And Terrance, in the middle of the continuity-heavy unit era, has to briefly recap Spearhead from Space, and Terror of the Autons, and The Mind of Evil, which won't even be novelized for nearly another decade, even though it's terrific. And Terrance has to foreshadow the threat of the Master, who's not even a proper character in the book until Chapter 4, and he has to set up all the political satire, the comedy, and the fencing. Quote, Bill Filer edged into the room, wondering how he'd ever got the impression that the British were calm and reserved. And all this in just 11 pages. All of that material without a single wasted sentence. Now compare this, for example, to the 1994 Doctor Who New Adventure novel, Fall of the Shadow, where the Seventh Doctor spends literally 100 pages just standing in the same spot. Now, Fall of the Shadow was not a bad book, but it's not Terrance Dicks either. I'm not going to go too heavily this time into the changes between screen and book, but they're the usual changes you've come to expect if you've been following me along on this book journey for the past 7 months or so. Chapter 2 is a good example of Terrance unentangling a lot of intercut scenes on TV. Pigbin Josh is in about 4 separate scenes on TV, muttering but not speaking, played by regular Havoc stuntman Derek Ware. That's all condensed to a single scene in the book, with the character now called Old Josh, taking up parts of 4 pages. The line Born of Necessity, on the day of studio taping about freak weather conditions, is absent from the book, as is Corporal Bell, who was making her final TV appearance, but in the event is not in the book at all. There is more of Terrance's dry comedy. Chin is given a, quote, Napoleonic streak, although that's the second time in 2 chapters that Terrance calls him Napoleonic. And old Josh, quote, was so intent on turning his experience into profit, it didn't occur to him that the object might have plans of its own. The book's political leanings are also explored as we learn about the Newton power complex through the Brigadier's eyes. So many Let's era Doctor Who stories involve British attempts at energy independence ending in disaster. Newton is described as, quote, the vital first step in Britain's use of atomic power for domestic and industrial supply. From one enormous nuclear reactor, Terrance continues, power was channeled to outlets all over the country. The fact that of all possible sites the thing had plunked itself down beside the Newton reactor seems suspicious in the extreme, he says of the Axon spaceship. In short, the plot of Axos makes a lot more sense in the book than on TV, where it's arguably lost in between hammy acting performances, Dayglow and CSO'd interiors, and awkward jumps between scenes. Michael Ferguson was one of Doctor Who's most visually inventive directors between War Machines and the Stone Cold Classic Ambassadors of Death, but this story's visuals strained his genius. Terrance in the book, of course, can ignore all that and just get right to the heart of the matters. Now, while there are some novelizations that fundamentally alter the TV story into something unrecognizable, telling an almost entirely new story utilizing the same basic characters from TV, we saw this much earlier in the line with David Whittaker's 2 1960s books, or Malcolm Hulke's novelizations, most of which are sadly in the rear-view mirror on this program, although we'll see them again in the mid to late 80s, many, many months from now, when we reach the likes of The Massacre or The Romans. Now, Terrance is not doing any of that wholesale reinvention. He is giving a faithful accounting of the TV dialogue and scenes, albeit, of course, with the minor changes to lines or scene order that I've already talked about. Where the literature of Terrance Dicks comes in, and the reason why I dig so deep into the text of the books and spend so much time discussing even the minor changes, is the gloss that he puts on the story. He is constantly at work, constantly exploring why things happen the way they do on TV. He fills in the margins, hence all that strenuous work in Chapter 1 introducing Chin. In Chapter 3, Terrance gets into the Doctor's alien nature. The Doctor is annoyed at Windsor for wanting to double-check his readings, wishing the unit troops would go away, let him explore the Axon spaceship in peace. and why Joe, who has an entirely silent subplot in episode 1 that's concentrated into chapter 3 of the book, is given many POV thoughts about how Yates and Benton are treating her like a child, or how she can explore the rest of the Axon spaceship before the Doctor has a chance, or the way the Brigadier realizes that the Doctor is trying to outthink Axos, even before they're exposed as malignant, by pointing out inconsistencies in their cover story. Chin is quoted as glaring reproachfully at the Doctor, indicating that the Doctor's skepticism was in thoroughly bad taste. Terrance always wants to put you half a step ahead of the regulars, so that the Doctor's eventual logical leaps never take the reader by surprise, and he always wants to get a half smile out of the reader at these sometimes ludicrous situations in which our heroes find themselves. Here's an example. Page 40, POV to Nicholas Courtney. The scene was at once mysterious and absurd, thought the Brigadier. There they all stood in the mysterious heart of this glowing spacecraft, confronting these golden-skinned, smooth-tongued Axons and their pet Toad. End quote. Terrance reworks the Part 1 cliffhanger, end of Chapter 3, to take the focus away from the fantastic, away from the double cliffhanger that on TV is the surprise appearance of the Master and the shock reveal of the Axos creature's true form. Those of us who are reading the books in publication order, of course, have already seen the same prop, spray-painted green, used as the crinoid back in Doctor Who and the Seeds of Doom, episode 29. Instead, Terrance replaces that with a long argument involving the Doctor and Chin, and the Brigadier, and Windsor, and Hardiman, over the true value of Axonite, and whether or not it belongs just to England or to the entire world. This was presumably written but cut for timing from TV, but Terrance puts it on pages 41 and 42, and moves the Master's appearance back to the episode 2 material entirely, which is chapter 4. On TV, your brain might be numbed by the visuals. In the book, your brain is stimulated by Terrance turning the story back to human greed, talking about the Trojan horse, and including a healthy dose of political debate. Chapter 4 again puts the focus on Chin, whose cabinet minister is described as having a face, quote, rather like a cunning old bloodhound. When Chin exits the Axon ship in order to gain government approval to seize Axonite for the UK, the Doctor in the book, quote, thought hard. It was easy to deduce Chin's next move, which meant he must make some adjustments of his own. When the Doctor then compares Axonite to the Trojan horse, Terrance nimbly slips into Joe's POV to help us remember what the Trojan horse is. Alas, Terrance misses the chance here to get in a shout-out to the Mythmakers, just as he also fails to compare Joe's aging to death at the end of Chapter 7 to the sad fate of Sarah Kingdom at the end of the Daleks' Master Plan, but again, Terrance had not been around for those Hartnell-era stories. Terrance also lets slip that Windsor is after Axonite in order to win a Nobel Prize, and has Joe directly observe, quote, now she knew why the Doctor had suddenly changed his attitude. He didn't care whether Axonite would be good or bad for humanity. He wanted it for himself! Exclamation point. Now we're suddenly in heist movie territory, where everyone's out to double-cross everyone else, and Terrance is here for it. These internal thoughts do come at the expense of Chin's very funny two-scene confrontation on TV with the Minister, which is shorter in the book and only one scene long.
Minister, will you scramble, or shall I, sir?
Just your report, Chin. I'm sure that will be quite garbled enough.
Yes, sir. Well, as I anticipated, we are having a certain amount of trouble with these unit people, sir.
We, Chin? We?
Well, I am, sir.
Are you quite sure you can handle this matter, Chin?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, of course. About the special powers, sir.
Because if you are not, just remember, it's your head on the block, Chin, not mine.
Yes, well, I think we ought to look to the future, too. There are tremendous advantages for humanity in Axonite.
Yes, but tremendous material advantages. But I doubt if even Axonite could increase the growth of human common sense. But since you seem hell-bent on getting hold of it, I suggest the best thing to do is restrict its use to your laboratories until we've made a full analysis of all its properties.
We?
You mean you want to cooperate with us?
Scientifically, yes.
Windsor?
It depends.
On what?
Who leads the investigation?
Why, you do, of course.
About my request,
Special powers have already been granted. Do your best to keep me informed, old chap. After all, you are our man on the spot, Chin, in more ways than one.
Minister? Right, Brigadier.
Terrance in Chapter 4 also plays up the threat of the Doctor switching sides earlier than on TV. The Doctor is openly dismissive of Jo in the book and leaves Jo wondering about his true loyalties. There's also a really nifty scene in Chapter 5, exclusive to the book, where the Doctor tricks Tim Pigott-Smith's regular Army captain character out of arresting him and Jo. On TV, the captain pays no attention to the Doctor and Jo at all, which is something of a plot hole since he's under orders to arrest all unit personnel, and Jo in the book helpfully points out to the reader that she and the Doctor are unit personnel. And Terrance continues to add material, not on TV, where Jo despairs that the Doctor is more loyal to Axonite and its promises of time travel than he is to UNIT and to her. Quote, as Windsor and the Doctor moved off, Jo said sadly, "So you have changed sides after all, Doctor?" The Doctor paused in the doorway and gave her a benign smile. "A matter of basic loyalties, my dear. I'm afraid mine must always be to science." On the top of page 65, Windsor discloses his secret plan to use his particle accelerator to travel in time. I wonder if Donald Belisario read this chapter, and if it formed some inspiration for the quantum leap accelerator. In the book, the Doctor guesses Windsor's aim, much to Windsor's discomfort, 14 pages before Windsor himself starts quoting the quantum leap saga cell. In Chapter 6, Terrance has the Doctor realize that the Axon filer duplicate is a fake because he's already had experience with alien duplicates, thanks to his encounters with the Autons. Page 72. Now, in the old days, the Target editors would have put a footnote in here, and there was in fact a footnote in the previous book, but I believe we're just about at the end of the Target novelization's footnote era, unfortunately. Terrance also has tremendous fun writing from the Master's POV. Here's his mini cliffhanger to end Chapter 6, the paragraph that usually ends Episode 2 of a 4-part story, but here not the actual TV cliffhanger, rather a neat little moment of the Master planning more mayhem. The Master sat beside the driver, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He found it very appropriate that the message, which would mean the final doom of Earth, had been sent from the heart of the organization dedicated to its protection. One bird had been killed, it only remained to kill the other. When the TARDIS arrived at Newton, the Doctor wouldn't be very far away. The Master smiled and fingered the laser gun beneath his coat. The actual Episode 2 cliffhanger is held back to page 84, the few pages into Chapter 7 and more than halfway into the book, and also makes a little more sense of Windsor's death, which is unclearly staged on TV, where he's electrocuted and seems to transform into an Axonite creature, whereas in the book he's simply absorbed directly into Axonite and disappears forever. Another example of Terrance clarifying the TV story and broadening out its political implications is on page 85, when he explains exactly how the Master's message, sent clandestinely from Unit HQ about Axonite, sparks a worldwide crisis and scandal against Chin's efforts to hoard Axonite for the UK. Once again, it's clear why Terrance commissioned the story and spent so much effort working Baker and Martin's draft scripts into something resembling broadcast shape. Again, it's all about the political wrangling and backroom dealing, not about Dayglow monsters or CSO. This is another prime example of how the novelizations can salvage the reputation of less than beloved TV serials, with Axos on the bottom half of the year 2014 DWM rankings. Page 97. Chin was left alone with his map. He was quite unaware that his efforts had brought considerably nearer the total destruction of Earth. In one area, well, 2 areas, directing and editing, there is slightly more fun to be had watching Axos on TV than reading about it. In the book, Hardiman, the director of the nuclear power plant, asks the Master if the Doctor's TARDIS is really able to store the entire output of the complex. The Master's response is fairly long and ends with a smooth scene transition. "Oh yes," said the Master gently. "At least I hope so. It'll be just too bad for all of us if I'm wrong." He disappeared inside the TARDIS and closed the door. But on TV, the scene ends abruptly, in such a way as to generate humor.
Back into this contraption.
Why?
Well, theoretically, it should be able to store all the power generated around it, like a solar cell battery.
You're trying to tell me you can absorb the total output of this complex in a police box?
Yes.
even with material cut out, Terrance still manages to get at what makes the Delgado Master the greatest master of all time, such as on page 107. Quote, "The Master switched on the TARDIS loudspeaker system and yelled, 'Risk the cables, man! Risk everything! We've got to!' As his fingers flashed over the TARDIS console, the Master was actually smiling. He liked a good crisis. In his own peculiar way, he was enjoying himself." The resolution to the Episode 3 cliffhanger, the first pages of Chapter 10, show two more very effective tricks in the Terrance toolbox. One is his liberal use of italicized phrases and ellipses to make important passages stand out on the page and invest tension in key moments. Naturally, these tricks don't quite work when your Brooklyn accented host tries to use them in a podcast script, but they do propel along the narrative on the printed page. And then Terrance invests real emotion in the sacrificial death of a tertiary character. Sir George Hardiman barely registers on TV. He dies trying to connect or disconnect the reactor cables that Axos is trying to use to destroy the power plant, and his death barely goes remarked upon. Not in the book, though. In the book, Hardiman gets a memorable single-scene subplot. As he volunteers to disconnect the cable, he says, "This is my responsibility. I'm a scientist. Or I used to be." Terrance dips into his head for the only time in the book, starting on the bottom of page 114. Hardiman pushed up the goggles to wipe the sweat from his eyes, replaced them, and went on with his task. It was a very long time since he had last had tools in his hands, but he worked calmly and steadily, with a curious feeling of contentment. Despite all the years and meetings and conferences, he could still do a real job when he had to. Like a man defusing a bomb, he unscrewed the last bolt and lifted the trigger section free. Gently, he lowered it to the floor. The Master observes, only in the book, that Hardiman is carrying out his task, quote, "surprisingly well," which is literally the only genuine compliment that the Roger Delgado Master ever paid to any human. Otherwise, in the Episode 4 material, scenes begin earlier and go out later, likely the residual of scenes that had to be topped and tailed on TV in order to fit the running time. The book has more explanatory dialogue and more insults. Mike Yates's bingo calling reference, "Eyes down, look in," garners a Roger from the Brigadier on TV, but in the book gets a more surly, "Never mind the comedy," which I would like to think is Terrance editorializing. Terrance also omits a televised reference to Bill Filer being a New Yorker. Yeah, trust me, he ain't one of us. In Chapter 11, Terrance adds a paragraph to show Axonite activating its nutrition cycle all over the world, reminiscent of material he'd added to the Spearhead from Space novelization, his first target 3 years earlier. This chapter, by the way, is titled The Feast of Axos, later adapted as a Big Finish 6th Doctor audio title. Alas, Terrance's predictive powers only extend as far as Big Finish, and not the Chris Chibnall TV canon. Check out this line that now seems quaint and parochial from page 131. "An attack on the Time Lords themselves was beyond even the Master's audacity." Chapter 12 is a final example of Terrance giving us more. The last line on TV is here, in slightly altered form, but then there's more than another full page of denouement with a proper exit for Bill Filer and a final bit of bickering for the Doctor and the Brigadier. Terrance also adds a fine line, which I could have sworn was on TV, about how the Doctor wouldn't have left his human friends in the lurch. Well, he would have left them, but not in the lurch.
Yes. Well, the Axon said they wanted time travel, and now they've got it.
What about the Master?
I sincerely hope he's with them.
Hope?
Well, I can't be absolutely sure. I was pretty busy at the time. But I'm 90% certain, no.
How much?
Well, pretty certain. Well, I suppose he could have got away. Just?
This time loop thing. How did you get out of it?
Oh, I simply boosted the circuits and broke free.
And you came back of your own accord?
Well, I...
Doctor?
No. No, I'm afraid not. No, obviously the Time Lords have programmed the TARDIS always to return to Earth. It seems that I'm some kind of a galactic yo-yo.
In short, Claws of Axos, the book, is a terrific bit of world building, Terrance reinventing one of the lesser beloved lights of the Pertwee era and making it a classic long novelization with tons of political fencing and double dealing. Chin gets a final grace note in the book. He is there in the last TV scene without saying any words, his fate never spelled out, but in the book Terrance is sure to tell us, quote, Chin was already safely back in Whitehall, explaining to the minister how his genius had solved the problem. And so Chin lives on, free to fight another day. But for us, next time on Doctor Who Literature, it will be May 1977, and we're back to the Hinchcliffe era, to the first televised Hinchcliffe story, in fact. Not for us, the pleasures of Terrance Dicks, we will instead be meeting a first-time target author, who will turn out to be one of the leading writers of the range, and who will contribute books to the line for a full decade to come. The next book is so precious, you'll want to preserve your copy in bubble wrap, green bubble wrap. Join me and a third-time Doctor Who literature guest as we encounter Ian Marter and Doctor Who and the Ark in space. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. I'm Jason, your host and editor and producer. Special thanks to my special guest, Jan Fennick. This podcast can now be found on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at anchor.fm/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's DrWho Novels. I also write about Doctor Who on Twitter using the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, that's DrWho Pilgrimage. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Next time, we'll be discussing another novelization, and we'll again be joined by a very special guest. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.